Let's begin.
All right. So we have our first speaker for this particular Change Speakers series. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of Communication Studies of the University of Ghana, and of which she is a proud alumna and the current head. For 13 years, she has taught in higher education with interests as a scholar, researcher, advocate, and practitioner straddling marketing, communication, gender, and media development. She has worked on several projects, including the Status of Women in the Ghanaian Media Report and the recently launched State of the Ghanaian Media Report, of which she was the lead investigator. Her current research attempts have tracked advertising revenue inflows into the Ghanaian media, as well as evolutions in brand communications as shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our first speaker is Dr. Abena Yeboah-Benin. Dr. Yeboah-Benin, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Theodora, and greetings to Thompson and also all who are listening to this conversation this morning. I believe that it is very timely, and thank you to Multimedia also for giving us this wonderful opportunity to extend the reach and perhaps the impact of the report as acknowledged by Samson to have been developed by the Department of Communication Studies here at the University of Ghana. I'm very happy to be here. And Theodora, am I good to go on? Or these are just to say good morning and thank you?
No, please, you do your presentation now.
Okay, so we've been invited to speak to the topic, and this was actually one of the titles in the report, the media and national development, the premise, the promise, and also the practice. I choose to focus on pluralism. And so I have reframed mine to be speaking to media and national development, premise, promise, and practice of media pluralism. And in doing this, I focus particularly on the broadcast media because of its obvious power and reach in the country. And perhaps if we want to really look at our developmental agenda, the opportunity that the broadcast media offers for us to reach all voices and ideas across the country. And so my focus would be on the pluralism as we are practicing it in Ghana at the moment, and whether or not the foundations for such pluralism have been laid, and again, whether or not the way in which we're practicing it would lead us to benefit from the promise that pluralism is supposed to offer any nation. Before I get to the substance of my presentation, though, allow me to just share a quick anecdote. So, somewhere in the late 90s, up to about the early 2000s, as a young lady, I became quite conscious that something was changing in the environment around me. And this something was, from my observation, as uninformed as it was, an avalanche of news and current affairs all over around me around the late 1990s and early 2000s. Wherever I turned, it was as if there was news and current affairs. And the reason this stood out into poignant recognition for me was because I had grown up not liking the news very much, certainly not liking talk shows and current affairs that dealt with politics. And there's some history to that. You see, a few years before this late 1990s, as a child, living in a house where we didn't have a TV set of our own, out together with my siblings in the evenings on Sunday, wash my feet so that it looks as though I've had a shower, and then go to somebody who had a TV set to their living room to watch the Osofudazi or Brad Dache, that kind of drama show that was shown on GTV. And to get a good spot in the living room, we had to arrive early. Unfortunately, arriving early meant watching what for us at the time was a boring talking point. And so you would see how because of that experience with Talking Point, which was stopping us from enjoying the show that we had actually gone there for, it was a consciousness in me when a bit later then all over around me you turn and there was news and there was current affairs discussion. And the reason I go to this story from my childhood is because I think it prompts us as a nation to something that has become very characteristic of our media space, our media ecology, pluralism, because wherever you turn, there is media, there is radio, there is TV, somebody is talking to you through some mediated channel. And so, in fact, sometimes when we meet our other African colleagues, they will say, Ghanaians, you're very lucky because you have this media environment where you can say whatever you like and there's opportunity on your many platforms to do that. They are right when they say that because we do have what seems to be plural media space in the country, and it is guaranteed in law. So the framers of our constitution made sure that we would be in a situation of media pluralism by guaranteeing in the constitution that free media is guaranteed, there shall be no censorship, there shall be no impediments to the establishment of private press. If you did something against another person, they have the right of reply, etc. So it would seem as though our constitution dreams of a media environment that has pluralism, which means that a media environment that allows different voices to speak and be heard, and to also have the right of reply if they have been slighted. But in such media environment, the beauty of it, I think, is the opportunity it presents in our walk towards development for different ideas to be sampled from different people from all corners of this country. In the space of plural media, there's opportunity for your voice to be heard as much as the opportunity for the most intelligent or the worst of person's voice to be heard. And we all then get opportunity to collaborate and contribute to what we want to be the development of Ghana. Again, where we have plural media, there's also opportunity for conversations about our national development priorities not to be hijacked by any groups of persons because we all have access to the media space to share ideas. Again, in the space of media pluralism, underserved groups, marginalized groups, etc., would have voice within the media space and also have opportunity for their needs to be included and accounted for in development. If you look at it from the media practice point of view, so the practitioners, you were just alluding to the fact that working conditions are bad. Where there is pluralism, there's opportunity for practitioners to get jobs. And perhaps market forces competition will mean that they will be even better remunerated, etc., etc. So media pluralism is good for all sorts of reasons if we are looking at things from our development. And so I'm not surprised, and I'm sure nobody else is, that given the dream of our constitution towards a plural media environment, we have for the last 30 years vehemently pursued a pluralism agenda. And so today, as Samson was talking about, we have over 500 radio stations, 150 plus TV stations in operation, the newspapers we cannot count, and of course the online media are also there. So if anybody cared to observe what is happening in the Ghanaian media landscape, perhaps the conclusion will be that we live the media pluralist dream. In other words, we live in the ideal world, so long as practicing media in a manner that allows the expression of diverse, even opposed opinions to be made. But I question this premise that actually we live in the media pluralist dream. And it is because I ask, do we really practice media pluralism in Ghana? Indeed, is the Ghanaian media positioned to facilitate national development by providing a platform where, as the framers of the Constitution said, objective information is disseminated, different and opposed views are presented and shared, and enlightened public opinion is formed and political consensus mobilized and achieved. Do we really have this in reality? Is the Ghanaian media presenting us with opportunity for this dream that the framers of the Constitution had when they were putting in those guarantees? I'm not too sure that we have, and I think that there are a few other people out there who would agree with me that we don't. What appears to be the case, rather, is what looks like a media pluralism facade, something that looks like we have media pluralism, but in reality is actually not that. I cite 3 examples, if you'd allow me to explain this. And in the State of the Ghanaian Media report, we allude to these 3 things that I'm coming to explain as the reason for inviting us to question the kind of media pluralism that we are practicing in the country. The first is political capture. The second is media empire building, a trend towards media empire building. And the last one is geographical diversity issues. So on the political capture, anybody who is watching the Ghanaian media scene would see that actually there's a lot of politics and political voices in our media. Indeed, MFWA data from, I think, 2018 reports that as much as a third of Ghana's media is owned by individuals who are highly politically exposed or connected. So there's a lot of, if you like, access and control from the political side of this country into our media. And that being the case, then other voices are being drowned out. And so little wonder that when you turn on the radio everywhere, or even the TV, a lot of the content, if it is talk show, news, etc., what is being spoken about tends to be dealing with partisan politics. It is because partly our media has, politics has made quite a big inroad into our media space. And a lot of media ownership is actually in the hands of politicians. And they bring their political color to the content that is produced on their platforms. They bring their political color to the voices that can have expression on these platforms. In fact, the reality is that that political capture is actually an NDC NPP capture. And so the other partisan political voices have also seemingly, at least to a large extent, been drowned out. I said there's also a trend towards media empire building. And that is because we have seen, as we said in the report, that there is a trend visible already towards media conglomeration, media companies acquiring so many frequencies that they are taking on a tone for empire building. Angel Broadcasting Network presently holds, I think, about 17 plus broadcast platforms. Multimedia, on which we speak today, is about 10 platforms. There are other examples. So you would see that through this empire building attempt, media power and access is increasingly becoming concentrated in only a few hands. These are 17 or so platforms that should be distributed so that there's more diversity in the media. But all of them have been placed in the hands of whoever runs Angel. So many of them have been placed in the hands of whoever owns multimedia, etc., etc., etc. And this trend towards media empire building actually also means that fewer voices have access and power within the media space. The other side of the media empire building concern is the fact actually that these media platforms then hold a lot of access to audiences. And through that, therefore, they hold a lot of power when it comes to opinion shaping and opinion formation. MFWA data shows us that 4 media companies, Angel Broadcasting Network, Multimedia, Despite, and Media General, together hold a weighted audience share of 87%. Across this country, 87% of the audience are concentrated on platforms in the hands of 4 companies, which may actually be in the hands of 4 individuals. If you wanted plural media, I wonder whether we are there, if this is actually the story on the ground. And again, think about the fact that because these are empires, because these are business concerns, then perhaps that access they hold to people's mind, people's eyes, people's ears can become available to the highest bidder who is ready to pay the highest advertising budget. And so again, there is some concern there. The last one I signal as an invitation for us to have a relook at the pluralism we practice in this country is geographical diversity. And so we have done a good job in making sure there is media, particularly radio, all across the country. And wherever you turn, you should be able to access radio. The challenge, though, is what is happening on these radio stations. For the large part, these radio stations, however far removed from Accra they are still doing Accra. Their content is still focused on what is Accra, to the neglect of things that are happening, the daily lived realities of people within the catchment of the stations. The language that is being broadcast on these platforms are also not diverse. Just take a picture of what happens in Accra and you see what I mean. And so we live in Accra, which speaks, at least the language here is Ga. But think about how many of the stations in Accra are using the Ga language. Yesterday, there was a discussion on the morning show on Joy about what language are we speaking to our children at home. What language are our children also hearing when they listen or consume the media? So even though geographically media is present across the country, it will seem as though the content on these stations are not diverse at all, nor do they open up space by language as led by their vulnerabilities, etc., to be heard and to contribute to national development. I have a few suggestions as to how we address this issue of a facade of media pluralism. In other words, the problem I am identifying with our media, and I know the other speakers would identify other problems, is that what should be media pluralism in Ghana only exists notionally rather than in meaning. And so we need a few recalibrations so that we can realign ourselves and actually achieve the real benefits that plural media are supposed to deliver to a nation. I think that we need to give life to the aspirations of the constitutional dream of pluralism by doing a number of things. So regarding the political capture, perhaps it is time for us to really become a bit more proactive in pursuing the regulatory realignment between the NCA and the NMC so that the two can work together in making sure that where licenses go, they are used towards developmental interests rather than in the hands of politicians. Again, we need to also recalibrate so that there is a decoupling of the NCA from the Ministry of Communications. For as long as the NCA is an agency of the Ministry of Communications and therefore to some extent at the mercy of what the minister who is politically appointed has to or wants to do, there will be concerns there. And we've observed, for instance, that when NDC is in power, more stations aligned to NDC come up. When NPP is in power, more stations aligned to NPP come up. We think part of the puzzle may have to do with the fact that the regulatory agency needs a bit more independence from the executive machinery. Again, on that line, the appointive power of the president over the NCA boss also needs a relook. The board is constituted by the president, and so again, if you wanted to extend the reasoning, perhaps we'll understand why there's so much political influence. Because if you're in power, you might want to make sure that there are enough stations that can promote your agenda. Again, to address this political capture, we need to have transparency on the identities of individuals that own media, so that perhaps the public and stakeholders can also take an interest in helping the regulatory agencies to hold these individuals to account. On the media empire building, I think we are at that point where we need to cap how many frequencies are going into the hands of one person or one business. And again, if we know who is behind media, if the identities of individuals who own media are being published openly, then again, we can all take an interest in helping the regulatory agency to make sure that not too many platforms are awarded to one person. And if we're going to take an interest in capping how many frequencies goes to each person so that there is more diversity in the space, then I think that we also need to make sure that the NCA takes a bit more proactive interest in the transfer of frequency licenses. When we were doing the report, one of the things we saw was that if I have been awarded the license by NCA and I decide I'm no longer able to use it, I transfer it and we notify the NCA. That being the case, a person who already owns 30 platforms is positioned to be able to acquire the 31st platform rather than it going into another hand so that more diversity is introduced. And so again, we need to do some of these changes so that the trend towards empire building in our media can be addressed and halted. The last one is the geographical diversity, and my suggestion there is that perhaps it is time for us to incentivize more diversity across the country in terms of content, in terms of the language. So when next perhaps we want to allocate frequencies, perhaps it is time for us to decide we have this number of frequencies available, but they are only going to individuals who are going to be broadcasting in Burundi, who are going to be broadcasting in Eve, who are going to make sure that there is 40% content that only focuses on the catchment where they broadcast. I imagine that this will bring opportunity for more diversity in the language, in the issues that are being broadcast within the local communities, and also present opportunity for local people who may not be able to speak Twi or English to also contribute to the table. I bring my message to an end by reminding us that the real benefits of media for development are achievable through a number of means, one of which is for it to be plural in orientation and in meaning, so that different ideas, different voices can be mobilized and sampled for the purposes of deciding how we build this nation called Ghana. And at the moment, we don't seem to have that. And so perhaps instead of spending energies on breaking the eight or not breaking the eight, our attention should be breaking the facade of media pluralism so that the true benefits of media can be brought to the benefit of the land. Thank you.
Much, very compelling there, and the recommendations so significant. What do you say?
Yeah, I think she hits the nail right on the head, and the question of diversity, right, and in terms of ownership and the content, and we often say that plurality is not necessarily the same as diversity. The fact that you have so many radio stations, TV stations, does not mean that people have access to, you know, reliable information that actually pertains to their well-being.
Right.
And we see a lot of, and I think Doc mentioned that in terms of content, even those in the rural areas, they are getting content that relates to Accra or the capital regions. And I think that is important that we look at local content, and the question of, you know, the funding or support for community media also becomes another matter for discussion.
Political capture or NDC-NPP capture, a lot of politics and political voicing, a third of the Ghanaian media owned by politicians, politically exposed persons. You have the problem of the media empire building, where she tells us about almost 90% of the audiences are controlled by only 4 media conglomerates, and the concentration means fewer voices have the opportunity to also be heard. And you say that there is a need to begin a conversation to cap the number of frequencies that can be placed in the hands of individuals. So my question to you, Doc, is I think it's the 2010 broadcasting bill, and we have been trying to refashion it. it doesn't appear that there is interest at all in it, particularly from the duty bearer, the political, persons who must make sure it happens. It provides for the capping such that you cannot own more than one media entity or radio station in one region. And in total, across the country, you cannot have more than 3. So it means you can have only 3, and all the 3 must be in different geographical areas, so to speak. Is that the kind of suggestion you are making? And do you see this happening at all?
Yes, Samson, we need to get to that point, is my argument, that in fact we are at the point where we need this to already have been in place, and how we are even going to do the mathematics of those who already have 19. What do we do so that it comes down to 3? I shudder to think about that, but we've gotten ourselves to this place. And I think that there's been enough calls for the promulgation of the broadcasting bill. Perhaps this is another opportunity to reiterate that call. It has provisions that addresses some of the problems that we're seeing in this country. And if we were able to get to promulgate it, I think we will all be the better off for it. But I am not too surprised that the energy towards passing it is perhaps not as much as industry stakeholders would wish for, because there are interests. I mean, I just shared with you data that 20% or a third of the media are in political hands. A lot of these political hands we speak of are in parliament, And so even when the bill is made, I am curious about how the discussion would go, because some of the people who should be discussing it are themselves interested parties and would perhaps, for want of a better word, suffer the consequences of some of the limitations that the bill is promising to put in place. And so we watch this space, and I don't know what industry stakeholders perhaps can do to push the agenda of the passage of the bill a bit stronger than presently is the case, because we don't want another right to information law process on our heads. And already the signs in the offing look like that is what we are having, that we're talking 20, 30 years before a bill that is so timely and needs to come to address all sorts of problems in our media would actually be passed into law.
And we will continue, and she will still be around when some questions, and please start filing your questions to us, because we'll put them to our guests once they are done with their presentations. And once they are done with their presentations, there will be another point where we'll pause and share questions among them as to what needs doing. Now,